In a quiet corner of northern Minnesota, surrounded by thick pine forests and the gentle hum of nature, there stood a small cabin by a shimmering lake. The cabin wasn't fancy, just a modest wooden structure with creaky floors and a fireplace that crackled on cold winter nights, but it was home to Alex, a man who loved nothing more than living simply and peacefully. His days were filled with fishing in the crystal-clear waters of the lake, tending to his garden, and taking long walks through the woods. It was the kind of life most people dreamed about but never got around to pursuing. Alex had inherited the cabin from his grandfather years ago. To him, it wasn't just a piece of property, it was a legacy, a connection to family stories and memories that stretched back generations. He took pride in keeping everything exactly as his grandfather had left it, the same worn-out rocking chair on the porch, the faded map of the stars pinned to the wall inside, and even the little rowboat docked at the edge of the lake. Life here felt timeless, untouched by the chaos of the modern world. But all good things seem to attract trouble eventually, and Alex's peaceful existence was no exception. Over time, developers had discovered the beauty of Crystal Lake too. They'd bought up land nearby and built a cluster of upscale homes for city folks looking to escape their busy lives on weekends. These new neighbors formed what they called a homeowners association, HOA, an organization meant to keep things orderly and maintain the pristine charm of the area. At first, Alex didn't pay much attention to them. After all, he lived far enough away from their shiny houses and manicured lawns that he figured they wouldn't bother him. That changed when Patricia, the head of the HOA, decided she wanted everyone under her control, including Alex. She started sending letters to his cabin, demanding that he start paying monthly fees to the association. According to her, Alex's land technically fell within the boundaries of their development plan, which meant he was required to follow their rules. But Alex knew better. He hadn't signed any agreement with the HOA, nor did he want anything to do with them. His family had owned this land long before the HOA even existed. Still, Patricia refused to back down. When Alex ignored her demands, she sent inspectors to his property, claiming he needed to fix various violations. Some said his roof was too old, others complained about the color of his shed. Every week brought another ridiculous complaint. Things escalated quickly after that. One morning, Alex opened his front door to find a notice taped to it, *, you are hereby ordered to vacate your residence immediately. * eviction? For living in a house his family had owned for decades? Alex couldn't believe what he was reading. Who did these people think they were? He crumpled the paper in frustration and tossed it into the fire. If they thought they could push him out so easily, they were dead wrong. What Alex didn't realize yet was that this fight would become much bigger than just him versus the HOA. It wasn't just about money or rules, it was about power, pride, and proving who really belonged in this place. And as tensions continued to rise, Alex found himself standing not only against Patricia and her crew but also against the entire community they represented. Little did anyone know, though, that Alex had a secret weapon, a piece of information that would turn the tables completely. But for now, all he could do was dig in his heels and prepare for the battle ahead. As the days passed, Alex began noticing strange things happening around his property. Someone cut branches from the trees along his driveway, making it harder for him to get in and out. Another time, he came home to find his mailbox smashed to pieces. Even worse, the HOA temporarily blocked off the dirt road leading to his cabin, leaving him stranded until he managed to convince a neighbor to help clear the way. It was clear that Patricia and her group weren't playing fair. They wanted him gone, and they were willing to use intimidation to make it happen. Despite the growing pressure, Alex refused to give up. Instead, he spent hours poring over old documents and maps, searching for anything that might prove his ownership beyond doubt. Deep down, he knew the truth was on his side. But he also understood that facts alone wouldn't stop the HOA. This was going to be a fight not just for his home, but for his right to live freely in the place he loved most. As he sat on his porch one evening, staring out at the calm surface of the lake, Alex made a silent promise to himself: no matter what happened next, he wouldn't let anyone take this away from him. Plus the trouble between Alex and the HOA didn't start with the eviction notice. It had been brewing for months, simmering just below the surface until it finally boiled over. At first, it seemed like harmless nuisances, little things that Alex could brush off as minor inconveniences. But as time went on, those small annoyances grew into something much bigger, more personal, and far harder to ignore. It all began when Patricia, the head of the HOA, sent her first letter demanding that Alex pay monthly dues. He read it once, shook his head in disbelief, and tossed it into the fireplace without a second thought. To him, it was ridiculous. The cabin had been in his family for generations, long before the HOA even existed. Why should he pay fees to an organization he'd never asked to join? Still, he figured it was probably just a misunderstanding. Maybe someone in the HOA office had made a mistake. So, he ignored it and went about his day, hoping the issue would resolve itself. But the letters kept coming. Each one was more forceful than the last, filled with legal jargon and thinly veiled threats. Failure to comply will result in further action, one of them warned. Another declared that Alex's refusal to pay constituted a violation of community guidelines. At first, Alex laughed at the absurdity of it all. What guidelines? This was his land, not theirs. But laughter turned to frustration as the HOA started taking steps to make their point clear. Inspectors began showing up unannounced, poking around his property and pointing out supposed violations. One claimed his roof was too old and posed a safety hazard. Another said his shed needed repainting because it didn't match the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood. Alex couldn't believe what he was hearing. His shed? Really? Who cared what color it was? And yet, every time he tried to explain that he wasn't part of the HOA, they brushed him off, insisting he had no choice but to follow their rules. Things escalated quickly after that. When Alex continued to ignore their demands, the HOA decided to get creative. They cut off access to the dirt road leading to his cabin, leaving him stranded for 2 days until he managed to convince a neighbor to help clear the way. Someone slashed his tires overnight, and another morning, he woke up to find his mailbox smashed to pieces. It was subtle enough to avoid being called outright vandalism, but Alex knew exactly who was behind it. The message was loud and clear: fall in line, or face the consequences. Despite the mounting pressure, Alex refused to back down. Instead, he dug deeper, determined to prove once and for all that he didn't belong to their little club. He spent hours poring over old documents in his attic, searching for anything that might strengthen his case. Among boxes of dusty photographs and faded letters, he found a stack of legal papers tied together with string. As he flipped through them, his heart skipped a beat. There it was, a deed confirming that his grandfather hadn't just owned the cabin, he'd also purchased Crystal Lake itself. And not only that, the deed included the only parking lot serving the entire HOA community. At first, Alex couldn't believe his eyes. How could something so significant have slipped under everyone's radar for so long? But the documents were real, stamped with official seals and signed by local authorities. For the first time since this whole mess began, Alex felt a flicker of hope. If the HOA thought they could push him around, they were about to get a rude awakening. Armed with this new information, Alex sought legal advice. He met with a lawyer who specialized in property disputes, explaining the situation and showing him the deeds. After reviewing the documents, the lawyer nodded approvingly. "You're in a strong position," he said. "Legally, you own the lake and the parking lot. That gives you a lot of leverage." Leverage was exactly what Alex needed. The HOA had treated him like an outsider, someone who didn't deserve respect or consideration. Now, he had the power to turn the tables completely. But how far was he willing to take it? Could he really shut down access to the lake and parking lot? Would doing so cause irreparable harm to the community? These questions weighed heavily on his mind as he considered his next move. In the meantime, the harassment continued. The HOA held meetings where Patricia painted Alex as a villain, accusing him of trying to freeload off their amenities without contributing financially. She rallied residents against him, urging them to sign petitions and file complaints. Some neighbors bought into her narrative, convinced that Alex was selfishly withholding resources they deserved. Others weren't so sure. A few quietly sympathized with him, though they were too afraid of retaliation to speak up. One evening, as Alex sat on his porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, he heard voices approaching from down the road. A group of residents marched toward his cabin, carrying signs and chanting slogans. "Open the lake," they shouted. "End the greed." Alex watched silently as they gathered outside his gate, their faces twisted with anger and frustration. He understood their feelings. They loved the lake too, but he couldn't help feeling bitter about the hypocrisy. Where was their outrage when the HOA tried to evict him? As the protest dragged on, Alex retreated inside, closing the door behind him. He poured himself a cup of coffee and stared out the window, deep in thought. This fight wasn't just about property rights anymore. It was about power, pride, and proving who really belonged here. And while Alex had every legal right to stand his ground, he couldn't shake the feeling that winning wouldn't come without a cost. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the air grew thicker. Neighbors avoided eye contact when they passed Alex on the road. Children whispered about him at school, calling him names they'd overheard from their parents. Even delivery drivers hesitated to stop by his cabin, citing safety concerns. Life had become a lonely, isolating experience, but Alex refused to give in. Every insult, every act of intimidation only strengthened his resolve. Late one night, unable to sleep, Alex wandered down to the edge of the lake. The water shimmered under the moonlight, calm and undisturbed by the chaos surrounding it. He stood there for a long time, letting the cool breeze wash over him. In that moment, he realized something important: this wasn't just about him. It was about protecting a legacy, his grandfather's legacy, and ensuring that future generations could enjoy the same peace and beauty he had grown up with. With renewed determination, Alex returned to the house and began drafting a plan. He knew the battle ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he couldn't face it alone. He reached out to a few trusted friends, people who lived outside the HOA's jurisdiction and understood the importance of standing up for what's right. Together, they brainstormed strategies, weighing the pros and cons of each possible move. By the time dawn broke, Alex had made up his mind. He wouldn't let the HOA bully him into submission. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one, but on his terms. As the sun rose over the horizon, casting golden light across the lake, Alex smiled grimly. Whatever happened next, he was ready. In a quiet corner of northern Minnesota, surrounded by thick pine forests and the gentle hum of nature, there stood a small cabin by a shimmering lake. The cabin wasn't fancy, just a modest wooden structure with creaky floors and a fireplace that crackled on cold winter nights, but it was home to Alex, a man who loved nothing more than living simply and peacefully. His days were filled with fishing in the crystal-clear waters of the lake, tending to his garden, and taking long walks through the woods. It was the kind of life most people dreamed about but never got around to pursuing. Alex had inherited the cabin from his grandfather years ago. To him, it wasn't just a piece of property, it was a legacy, a connection to family stories and memories that stretched back generations. He took pride in keeping everything exactly as his grandfather had left it: the same worn-out rocking chair on the porch, the faded map of the stars pinned to the wall inside, and even the little rowboat docked at the edge of the lake. Life here felt timeless, untouched by the chaos of the modern world. But all good things seem to attract trouble eventually, and Alex's peaceful existence was no exception. Over time, developers had discovered the beauty of Crystal Lake too. They'd bought up land nearby and built a cluster of upscale homes for city folks looking to escape their busy lives on weekends. These new neighbors formed what they called a homeowners association, HOA, an organization meant to keep things orderly and maintain the pristine charm of the area. At first, Alex didn't pay much attention to them. After all, he lived far enough away from their shiny houses and manicured lawns that he figured they wouldn't bother him. That changed when Patricia, the head of the HOA, decided she wanted everyone under her control including Alex. She started sending letters to his cabin, demanding that he start paying monthly fees to the association. According to her, Alex's land technically fell within the boundaries of their development plan, which meant he was required to follow their rules. But Alex knew better. He hadn't signed any agreement with the HOA, nor did he want anything to do with them. His family had owned this land long before the HOA even existed. Still, Patricia refused to back down. When Alex ignored her demands, she sent inspectors to his property, claiming he needed to fix various violations. Some said his roof was too old, others complained about the color of his shed. Every week brought another ridiculous complaint. Things escalated quickly after that. One morning, Alex opened his front door to find a notice taped to it, * you are hereby ordered to vacate your residence immediately. * eviction? For living in a house his family had owned for decades? Alex couldn't believe what he was reading. Who did these people think they were? He crumpled the paper in frustration and tossed it into the fire. If they thought they could push him out so easily, they were dead wrong. What Alex didn't realize yet was that this fight would become much bigger than just him versus the HOA. It wasn't just about money or rules, it was about power, pride, and proving who really belonged in this place. And as tensions continued to rise, Alex found himself standing not only against Patricia and her crew but also against the entire community they represented. Little did anyone know, though, that Alex had a secret weapon, a piece of information that would turn the tables completely. But for now, all he could do was dig in his heels and prepare for the battle ahead. As the days passed, Alex began noticing strange things happening around his property. Someone cut branches from the trees along his driveway, making it harder for him to get in and out. Another time, he came home to find his mailbox smashed to pieces. Even worse, the HOA temporarily blocked off the dirt road leading to his cabin, leaving him stranded until he managed to convince a neighbor to help clear the way. It was clear that Patricia and her group weren't playing fair, they wanted him gone, and they were willing to use intimidation to make it happen. Despite the growing pressure, Alex refused to give up. Instead, he spent hours poring over old documents and maps, searching for anything that might prove his ownership beyond doubt. Deep down, he knew the truth was on his side. But he also understood that facts alone wouldn't stop the HOA. This was going to be a fight not just for his home, but for his right to live freely in the place he loved most. As he sat on his porch one evening, staring out at the calm surface of the lake, Alex made a silent promise to himself: no matter what happened next, he wouldn't let anyone take this away from him. Alex had always been a quiet man, someone who preferred to stay out of trouble and let life unfold as it would. But when he discovered the old deeds hidden away in a dusty box at the back of his attic, everything changed. The papers confirmed what he'd only half believed before: his grandfather hadn't just owned the cabin, he'd also purchased Crystal Lake itself. And not just the lake, the only parking lot that served the entire HOA community was part of the deal too. At first, Alex couldn't believe it. How could something so big have slipped under everyone's radar for so long? But there it was, written in black and white, stamped with official seals. This wasn't just a stroke of luck, it was a game changer. For days, Alex wrestled with what to do. On one hand, he didn't want to cause more drama. He liked his simple life and didn't care much for being the center of attention. But on the other hand, the HOA had pushed him into a corner. They'd tried to bully him, harass him, and even threaten him into leaving his own home. Now, armed with this new information, Alex realized he finally had the upper hand. If they wanted access to the lake or the parking lot, they'd have to go through him, and that gave him all the leverage he needed. The next time the HOA called a meeting, Alex decided to show up uninvited. He walked into the room carrying a folder filled with copies of the deeds and sat down quietly in the back. The atmosphere was tense. Most of the residents were already worked up about their ongoing feud with Alex. Patricia, the head of the HOA, stood at the front of the room, pacing back and forth like she was ready to declare war. When she spotted Alex sitting there, her eyes narrowed. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Alex didn't respond right away. Instead, he waited patiently until the murmurs died down and everyone turned to look at him. Then, without raising his voice, he said, "I think you'll want to hear this." Slowly, he pulled out the deeds and passed them around the room. One by one, the homeowners read the documents, their faces shifting from confusion to disbelief. By the time the papers reached Patricia, the room was buzzing with shocked whispers. "You're telling us, you own the lake?" someone asked, breaking the silence. "That's right," Alex replied calmly. "And the parking lot too." Pandemonium erupted. People started shouting questions, accusing Alex of lying, demanding explanations. Patricia turned bright red, sputtering as she tried to regain control of the situation. "This has to be fake," she insisted, slamming the papers onto the table. "There's no way it's real," Alex interrupted, cutting her off mid-sentence. "You can check the records yourself if you don't believe me." But while we're on the subject, he paused for effect, letting the tension build. "Since I own the lake and the parking lot, I'm going to need anyone using them to get permission from me moving forward. Starting now." The room fell silent again. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, the reality of Alex's words sank in. Without access to the lake, the whole reason people had bought homes in this area disappeared. And without the parking lot, weekends would become a logistical nightmare. No one could park on the narrow dirt roads, and there was nowhere else nearby to leave their cars. The HOA members exchanged panicked glances, realizing they were completely at Alex's mercy. Overnight, things changed dramatically. Alex hired a local contractor to install gates at the entrance of the parking lot, locking it off entirely. Signs went up declaring the area private property, and notices were posted along the shoreline informing residents that boating, swimming, and fishing were prohibited unless they paid a fee directly to him. To drive the point home, Alex stationed a security guard at the gate during peak hours, ensuring no one snuck in without authorization. At first, the reaction was explosive. Residents gathered outside Alex's cabin, yelling and pounding on his door. Some hurled insults, calling him greedy and selfish. Others begged him to reconsider, promising to drop their complaints if he'd just reopen the lake. Local news crews showed up, eager to cover the escalating feud. Reporters interviewed angry homeowners, filming footage of the locked gates and empty docks. Neighbors accused Alex of ruining their lives, while he remained calm and resolute, refusing to budge. Behind the scenes, though, cracks began to form within the HOA. Not everyone agreed with Patricia's aggressive tactics. A few members started questioning whether fighting Alex was worth the cost not just financially, but emotionally. Secretly, some approached Alex to negotiate privately, hoping to find a compromise. Others simply stopped participating in the protests altogether, tired of the constant conflict. Even those who still sided with Patricia couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease spreading through the community. As weeks turned into months, the strain became unbearable. Weekends that were once filled with laughter and relaxation were now dominated by frustration and arguments. Families avoided coming to the lake altogether, unwilling to deal with the hassle. The HOA held emergency meetings almost daily, scrambling to figure out how to fix the mess they'd created. But no matter what they tried, nothing worked. Every attempt to challenge Alex legally failed because the facts were undeniable: he owned the land, plain and simple. Sitting on his porch one evening, Alex watched as another group of frustrated neighbors drove away from the gated parking lot, shaking their heads in defeat. He felt a mix of emotions: satisfaction that justice was finally being served, but also sadness that it had come to this. He hadn't asked for any of this drama, and frankly, he didn't enjoy seeing people suffer. Still, he knew he couldn't back down now. The HOA had brought this upon themselves, and if they wanted things to change, they'd have to meet him on his terms. Little did they know, Alex was already thinking ahead. Owning the lake and the parking lot gave him immense power, but it also came with responsibility. As much as he disliked the HOA, he understood that finding a solution that worked for everyone might be the best path forward for his peace of mind as much as theirs. As the standoff between Alex and the HOA dragged on, the tension in the community reached a boiling point. What had started as a personal battle over property rights had spiraled into something much bigger, a full-blown crisis that affected everyone living around Crystal Lake. The once idyllic neighborhood was now a powder keg of frustration, resentment, and anger. For weeks, residents tried to adapt to life without access to the lake or the parking lot, but it wasn't easy. Boats sat unused on trailers, kayaks collected dust in garages, and families cancelled plans to visit for weekends. The absence of the lake, the very thing that made this place special, left a gaping void no one knew how to fill. Patricia, the head of the HOA, became increasingly desperate. She spent hours strategizing with her board members, brainstorming ways to regain control of the situation. At first, she leaned heavily on public pressure, encouraging neighbors to protest outside Alex's cabin and demand he do the right thing. But when that didn't work, she turned to more drastic measures. She filed multiple complaints with local authorities, accusing Alex of everything from environmental violations to harassment. None of these claims held up under scrutiny, but they kept tensions high and ensured the conflict stayed in the spotlight. Meanwhile, the media circus continued. Reporters camped out near the lake, interviewing disgruntled homeowners and filming footage of the locked gates at the parking lot. Patricia appeared on TV several times, painting herself as a victim of greed and selfishness. In one particularly heated interview, she accused Alex of holding the entire community hostage, saying, "This isn't just about him anymore, it's about fairness and justice for all of us who worked hard to build our lives here." But not everyone bought into Patricia's narrative. Behind closed doors, cracks began to form within the HOA. Some members grew tired of the constant fighting and started questioning whether it was worth it. A few even admitted privately that Alex had every legal right to do what he was doing. One older couple, longtime residents of the area, confided in a neighbor that they sympathized with Alex. "He didn't ask for any of this," the husband said quietly. "We're the ones who pushed him too far." Others were less sympathetic but still frustrated with Patricia's leadership. They felt she had mishandled the situation from the beginning, escalating minor disagreements into an all-out war. Rumors spread that some board members were considering ousting her altogether, though no one dared say it openly. Publicly, everyone remained united against Alex, but privately, doubts lingered. Amid the chaos, a small group of residents decided to take matters into their own hands. Led by a middle-aged man named Tom, they approached Alex directly, hoping to negotiate a truce. Tom was known for being level-headed and reasonable, qualities that made him a natural mediator. He invited Alex to meet at a neutral location, a quiet cafe in town, and promised to keep things civil. Reluctantly, Alex agreed. He didn't trust the HOA, but he also recognized that dragging this fight out indefinitely wouldn't benefit anyone. When he arrived at the cafe, Tom greeted him warmly, offering a handshake and apologizing for how things had escalated. Over coffee, they talked openly about the situation. Tom explained that while many residents disagreed with Alex's actions, they understood why he'd taken such a hard stance. "Look," Tom said, leaning forward earnestly, "we messed up. We treated you like an enemy instead of a neighbor. That wasn't fair." Alex listened carefully, his expression unreadable. After a long pause, he replied, "I never wanted this kind of fight. All I ever asked for was respect for me and for my family's legacy. Instead, I got threats and accusations." Tom nodded, acknowledging the truth in Alex's words. "So here's the thing," he continued. "We can't undo what's been done, but maybe we can find a way to move forward. Would you be open to discussing a compromise?" It was a risky proposition, and Alex knew it. On one hand, reaching an agreement could bring peace to the community and allow him to return to the quiet life he cherished. On the other hand, giving in even slightly might embolden the HOA to push for more concessions down the line. Still, something about Tom's sincerity struck a chord with him. For the first time since the conflict began, Alex felt like someone was genuinely trying to understand his perspective. After mulling it over, Alex agreed to consider the idea. He told Tom he'd need time to think and asked that the group keep their meeting confidential for now. Word of their discussion leaked anyway, sparking mixed reactions among the residents. Some saw it as a ray of hope, while others accused Tom of betrayal. Patricia, in particular, was livid. She called an emergency HOA meeting to address the situation, denouncing Tom's actions as reckless and undermining her authority. Despite the backlash, Tom stood firm. "If we don't try to fix this, we'll lose everything," he told the crowd. "The lake, the parking lot, our weekends, all of it. Is that really what we want?" His words resonated with some, but others remained unconvinced. The divide within the community deepened, creating new fractures that threatened to tear it apart entirely. Back at his cabin, Alex wrestled with his decision. He spent hours pacing the porch, staring out at the lake, and replaying the conversation with Tom in his mind. Part of him wanted to dig in his heels and hold on to the power he'd gained. After all, the HOA had given him plenty of reasons to distrust them. But another part of him couldn't ignore the toll this feud was taking not just on him, but on everyone involved. Living in constant conflict wasn't sustainable, and he knew it. Eventually, Alex came to a realization: winning wasn't enough. If he truly wanted to protect his home and his way of life, he needed to find a solution that allowed both sides to coexist peacefully. With that thought in mind, he drafted a proposal outlining terms for a potential agreement. It included provisions for granting the HOA permanent access to the lake and parking lot in exchange for formal recognition of his independence from their rules. He also suggested funding improvements to the lakefront area, ensuring better environmental stewardship moving forward. When Alex presented his proposal to Tom and the rest of the negotiating group, they were cautiously optimistic. While some details still needed ironing out, the framework offered a path toward resolution. For the first time in months, there was a glimmer of hope that the nightmare might finally come to an end. Yet even as progress seemed possible, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that the road ahead would be rocky. Trust, once broken, wasn't easily rebuilt. And though he was willing to extend an olive branch, he knew forgiveness wouldn't come overnight. As he sat on his porch that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Alex reminded himself of one important truth: sometimes, the hardest battles aren't fought against others, they're fought within yourself. The negotiations between Alex and the HOA dragged on for weeks, each side carefully weighing their options. It wasn't easy. There were moments when tempers flared, old grievances resurfaced, and it seemed like the whole thing might collapse. But slowly, painfully, they began to find common ground. Alex's proposal became the foundation of their discussions, with both sides making concessions along the way. For Alex, the most important part was ensuring that his independence from the HOA was officially recognized. He didn't want to live under their rules or pay their fees ever again. The HOA, for its part, agreed to this condition but insisted on safeguards to ensure the lake and parking lot would be maintained responsibly. One of the key sticking points was money. The HOA knew they couldn't afford to buy back full ownership of the lake and parking lot outright. It would have bankrupted the association. Instead, they proposed a compromise: they'd fund improvements to the lakefront area, including better docks, cleaner facilities, and measures to protect the environment. In return, Alex would grant them permanent easement rights, allowing residents unrestricted access to the water and parking spaces. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair, and after months of hostility, fairness felt like a victory. As the final details were hammered out, the atmosphere in the community began to shift. Some neighbors who had once viewed Alex as an adversary started seeing him differently. They realized he wasn't some greedy outsider trying to profit off their misery, he was just a man defending what mattered most to him. A few even approached him privately to apologize for how things had escalated. One evening, a young couple stopped by his cabin with a homemade pie, thanking him for sitting down to negotiate. "We're sorry for everything," the wife said softly. "You didn't deserve to be treated the way we treated you." Alex accepted their apology graciously, though he still kept his guard up. Trust takes time to rebuild, and while these small gestures meant something, he knew not everyone shared the same sentiment. Patricia, for instance, remained bitterly opposed to any deal with Alex. She saw the agreement as a personal defeat and refused to support it publicly. Her resistance created tension within the HOA, leading to heated arguments during meetings. Eventually, her stubbornness alienated even her closest allies. When the board held a vote to approve the settlement, she found herself on the losing side, a bitter pill for someone used to getting her way. With the agreement finalized, life around Crystal Lake slowly returned to normal. Gates came down from the parking lot, and signs declaring it private property were removed. Residents reclaimed their spots by the water, casting fishing lines and launching boats like they used to. For many, it felt like coming home after a long absence. There was a renewed sense of appreciation for the lake, not just as a beautiful feature of the landscape but as something worth protecting. For Alex, the resolution brought a mix of relief and reflection. On one hand, he was glad the conflict was over. He could finally focus on enjoying his cabin and the peaceful life he'd always cherished. But on the other hand, the experience had changed him. He'd learned that standing up for yourself doesn't mean shutting others out completely. Sometimes, finding middle ground is the only way to move forward. Sitting on his porch one evening, watching the sun set over the shimmering surface of the lake, Alex thought about everything he'd been through. He'd faced intimidation, harassment, and public scrutiny, but he'd also discovered strength he didn't know he had. Over time, relationships in the community began to heal. Not everyone became friends, of course some wounds run too deep for that, but there was a newfound respect for boundaries. Neighbors who had once dismissed Alex as an outsider now acknowledged him as a legitimate part of the area's history. During summer barbecues and holiday gatherings, people occasionally invited him to join in, though he usually declined. Socializing wasn't really his thing, and he preferred keeping to himself. Still, the invitations were a sign that things were improving. Patricia, meanwhile, faded into the background. After losing influence within the HOA, she resigned from her position and moved away shortly afterward. Rumor had it she bought a condo in the city, far from the woods and lakes that had caused her so much trouble. Without her constant interference, the HOA became less confrontational and more focused on practical matters like maintaining roads and organizing community events. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. As the seasons changed, Alex noticed something else: the lake itself seemed different. With new efforts to clean it up and preserve its natural beauty, the water looked clearer than ever before. Fishermen reported bigger catches, and birds returned in greater numbers, filling the air with their calls. Even the trees along the shoreline appeared healthier, their branches stretching toward the sky like arms raised in gratitude. It was a reminder that nature has a way of bouncing back if given half a chance. One crisp autumn morning, Alex decided to take his rowboat out onto the lake. He hadn't done so in a long time, not since the height of the feud, when stress and anger had consumed him. Now, with peace restored, he felt ready to reconnect with the place that had always brought him solace. As he paddled across the glassy surface, leaves drifting lazily around him, he thought about his grandfather. How proud the old man would have been to see Alex stand his ground and protect the legacy they shared. Back at the cabin later that day, Alex sat by the fire, sipping a cup of coffee and flipping through an old photo album. The pictures inside showed generations of his family gathered at the lake, smiling faces, laughter frozen in time. He paused on one particular image, his grandfather standing proudly beside the cabin, holding a string of freshly caught fish. In that moment, Alex realized something profound. This fight hadn't been about revenge or proving a point, it had been about preserving a connection to the past, to the people and places that shaped who he was. And maybe, just maybe, it had been about teaching everyone involved a lesson too. About the importance of respecting others, listening instead of shouting, and finding ways to coexist despite differences. Life isn't always fair, and sometimes bad things happen to good people. But if you hold on to what matters most, if you stay true to yourself, you can weather even the toughest storms. As the fire crackled softly in the hearth, Alex leaned back in his chair and smiled. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the promise of quieter days ahead. Whatever challenges lay in the future, he knew one thing for certain: he belonged here, by this lake, in this cabin. And no one, not the HOA, not anyone, could ever take that away from him.